Hey there, welcome back. Glad to see you again. My name is Zach Gehring. I'm one of the Spanish supervisors, and we're going to be talking a little bit more about proficiency and how we can create a classroom with a proficient learning model where we're aiming toward proficiency and not just maybe coverage of material. So yesterday we talked about proficiency, but there are a couple things that need to happen in language before you can get to a level of proficiency. And there are three of those things. One of them is their level of achievement. The next is performance. And the last one, what we've talked about, is proficiency. Before we're proficient in a language, students, or missionaries in this case, need to go through an achievement phase, which basically is what you know about a language. This might be knowledge conceptually, or just things that you can answer questions about in the language. Performance might be equated to what you can do in rehearsed settings. Where you've practiced it a lot, it's either memorized or rehearsed, and you're able to do that over and over again, and it's accurate, and that's what we consider performance. Proficiency, however, is a little different. It's still what you can do in the language, but it's an unrehearsed setting. This introduces an element of spontaneous creation, of being able to, in the moment, speak and use the language and accomplish tasks without necessarily having done that before. So these three levels kind of lead to the proficiency that we're looking for in a classroom. Today we're going to focus on how to build, or how to have an approach in the classroom that leads to this level of proficiency rather than maybe just achievement or just performance. How can we actually help missionaries achieve proficiency in the language? So some examples of this achievement, performance, proficiency in our current curriculum. We'll start with task practice of what kind of this looks like. Achievement might be in this task practice when we're initially doing their memorization and error correction, where they kind of know about it and they've memorized it a little bit, and that kind of gets transferred a little bit into performance, where we're giving them a rehearsed setting where they're starting to create a little bit, but really they're using the memorized phrases. You might be correcting them again. That part where we put strings of sentences together in a kind of a memorized way, that again is performance. Now as we get to proficiency in task practice, that might be when they're in a more unrehearsed setting and they're starting to expand and they're starting to move to doing it on the spot, or in TRC, or in another practice scenario that you do. Grammar instruction might be when are they able to conceptually answer, know the meaning, right? That's kind of the first step, those 5 steps of language learning. Knowing the meaning is that achievement level where they can get it right on a piece of paper, and they could maybe even explain it to someone else. This performance is more toward using that maybe 5 verbs that you've conjugated correctly together. They're able to use those over and over and over again, maybe in a variety of settings, but again, all rehearsed. You've gone over them in class and they use them really, really well. Proficiency then, however, moves us to the conceptual knowledge of the grammar is able to be generalized to all verbs, or to most verbs, where they're able to, in unrehearsed settings, in between classes, as you take a break, as you're having conversation in the classroom, they're accurately using the grammar principle that you introduced, where that's proficiency in a language, where they're able to do it and it's an unrehearsed setting. It's probably a wider variety of settings. And that's kind of why we're moving, and we want to have this proficiency model of learning in the classroom so we can achieve that in the end. Let's talk about a traditional model. What currently we might be doing in a lot of ways is this kind of traditional model of kind of like a building block approach to language, where we cover a topic, whether that be grammar or vocab or some type of lesson. Then we're with them, but a lot of it comes to assuming that they know something or not really paying attention to how they're using it. And then we cover another topic. And we cover another topic, and there's this kind of building block, which is misleading because we think, oh, we need building blocks, and then we build a house or something. But we're assuming rather than actually finding out their actual levels of proficiency. And these, interesting enough, this word cover covers up the other one and almost gets lost in the bunch. This traditional model or this traditional approach may lead to more achievement and performance, but maybe not quite to proficiency. So in a classroom, this proficiency model might look a little different, where we have kind of a spiral approach where we use the language, whether that be a grammar concept or vocab or a sentence structure. Then we recycle that same principle or that same, here what would be considered a building block. We recycle it and use it over again, and then we expand. Now that expanding, this kind of model produces proficiency because it now introduces unrehearsed settings where you're not just, coming up with rote or memorized or in-the-moment things, but you're able to kind of expand your situations as well. An example of this might be, if we come to this traditional approach, in class, I think right now, teachers, and we have this idea that we need to cover multiple grammar topics, where one day we might start with the present tense, we cover it one day, the next day we assume that they know how to do it, and we assume that that means they'll be able to do it in multiple situations, and we cover the next grammar topic, and really it never gets to proficiency because we never expounded or recycled, which is exactly why we want to move to this kind of proficiency model where there's this usage and kind of initial covering or teaching of a grammar concept, let's say present tense, and maybe that first day you do just cover it in a small context. But instead of moving on to a new concept the next day, it's recycled. It's expounded upon. You're able to consistently, in formal grammar activities and outside of formal grammar activities, you're constantly recycling this conceptual idea of what present tense is. They'll be able to start using it more. And the more they use it, the more you're able to expound with them to more contexts, which is one of the ways that we can expand, also into more detailed text types of moving from short sentences with the present tense to longer sentences with the present tense and being able to expound in that way. And also in accuracy, where maybe at the beginning they're really struggling to be very accurate with it, but as you expand you're able to correct them more often and more detailed, where now they're learning from this first kind of initial use has been recycled and recycled and recycled and then expanded upon to lead to proficiency, where maybe when they're performing best is now in unrehearsed situations like TRC or like outside of the classroom. So as we start to expand, we can expand in things like content and context across a wider variety of content and context. Text type, we can increase from small sentences to bigger ones, and then accuracy. And let's talk a little bit more about what that might look like, of how can we know if they're being more accurate, and maybe what our expectations will be as we expand with them. Initially, we might, and we call this, and the word we'll probably use a lot is control. What control do the missionaries have over a certain aspect or type of grammar principle? Initially, it might be conceptual control. Conceptual control might be literally just in their mind, what does it mean? What does it actually play out? What are they seeing in their head when you say present tense? They'll be able to answer questions on a piece of paper, on a worksheet or a workbook. They'll get them all right. They'll maybe even be able to explain the grammar principle to somebody else, but there might not be much actual use of the grammar principle. But initially, you need to go through the step of conceptual control. The next one is partial control, which, again, as we expand, we're going to be expecting them to have partial control, not just conceptual, where we encourage a lot of creation. It may not be as accurate as or perfectly used in every single situation, but we want to reward that creation and risk-taking and maybe not correct every single error in the moment, which might be discouraging to the creation, but because all we're expecting is partial control where it isn't all the way accurate. But again, as we expand, as we recycle more, what we expect of them will move to full control, which will be still a lot of creation, a lot of risk-taking, but we'll be correcting more often. And they will have more accurate sentences. Again, back to the present tense of they'll be able to use present tense in their normal conversations with accuracy, and it's all correct, and it's conjugated correctly, and that's what we'll consider full control. And then our kind of expectations of accuracy will expand as we recycle more, as we move to different contexts, tense and contexts, as their text type expands. That's when our ability to see where they're at and the feedback that we give them also needs to expand to kind of this conceptual to partial to full control. Is that okay? So as we prep for being together, everything that we've talked about of this traditional model, this proficiency model of using recycling, expanding, and then specifically expanding the accuracy, before you come and before we're together, if you would, start to consider implications of how might this affect the way that you plan with your co-teacher, how might this affect the way that you set up activities in the classroom, and how might this affect the way that you give feedback, when you give it, how much you give it, etc., in the classroom as well. Write down your notes, write down your thoughts, and come prepared to share, and then we'll look forward to seeing you soon.